We're going to start now. Thank you. Good to start on time, typical Hebridean style, isn't it? Okay, well, welcome to the Angus Macleod Memorial Lecture. And whether you're here at Park School in person or linking in via the live stream. So it's hello to Neil Macmillan in Canada, Norman McLean in London, and the 26 other people that were online a few minutes ago. It's a nice evening and very unusual because all of you who come regularly to the lecture will remember that we usually have a howling gale. So there's no excuse for staying home tonight. A beautiful evening. This is a special year, the 21st in our prestigious series, and how time flies. Of even more significance is that this will be the last lecture in the series. Nothing goes on forever. Running out of people who knew Ease personally. A lot of work goes on, and we've thought long and hard and decided that now is the appropriate time to call it a day, having reached the 21st lecture milestone. And who could follow Elizabeth anyway? I mean, it'd be very difficult to follow her. We've had many prestigious speakers over the last 20 years, over the last 20 events, which is in fact 20 years, of course. And tonight is no exception with Elizabeth, Angus' daughter, telling us more about Angus, the man. Plenty published information about Angus and what he did in the various things he tackled, but tonight is more about Angus, the man. Elizabeth will mention more about the last 20 speakers in her lecture, some very interesting people indeed, and many of you will remember some of these lectures. I do, however, want to touch on one other significant and indeed sad event since we last met here in October last year, and that is the passing of our great friend, committee member, and chief organizer of so many things, the passing of Ishbel McLennan at the end of March. For those of you who knew Ishbel, you won't be surprised that she was the main organizer of all the refreshments, especially the lovely baking at these lecture events. And we remember that she would dash in at the last minute and have everything under control by the time the lecture started. So everyone who knew Ishbel remembers that she was very much a last minute person. Her husband John sends his best wishes for tonight. And we are discussing with him the possibility of hosting an event in spring to commemorate Ishbel's life and achievements. She did so much in our community. Coming back to tonight's lecture and our speaker, I spent some time looking at how we have worked with Elizabeth and her brother Ian over the years in building what is the Angus MacLeod archive in Cashiter and online. I came across some photos of our steering group meetings from 2004. My goodness, did we all look so much younger then? It was quite frightening to look at them. Just as well we're not putting these pictures up. It's been such an important resource and has been accessed by thousands of people over the years, including the website being hacked twice by the Russians. So that's how popular the website was. Following the lecture, as is customary, there'll be an opportunity to put questions to Elizabeth, followed by a vote of thanks at Gaelic Sam and Grace. That will conclude the formal part of the evening. You are then all welcome to stay behind for refreshments, as always, usually a good chat with everyone. You can look at the publications available on the tables over there, including an illustrated booklet based on Elizabeth's lecture, which we've published for tonight. There's calendars. I brought some of our calendars because they're just out yesterday, so anyone, we've sold quite a few already tonight, so hopefully there's a few left if you want a calendar. And there's also uniquely some postcards. So Chris Coles, who lives up in the town, he's been taking some beautiful photographs, so you'll see a choice of his postcards over there. And of course, we meet up with the old and new friends for a good chin wag right at the end. So it's now my privilege to ask Elizabeth to give the 21st Angus Macleod Memorial Lecture.
Thank you all for coming. I am honoured that you have asked me to give this lecture. I'm not a public speaker. I've never done anything like this in my life. But you persuaded me that it was appropriate that I should do it. And you might find out some things that you didn't know. And packing Dad's life into 30, 40 minutes wasn't easy, but we'll give it a go. Growing up in Calbost, Dad was born in Calbost, South Lochs in 1916, halfway through the First World War. From his own account, he was quite an inquisitive and mischievous wee boy. For instance, when he was about 3 years old, he fell into a pot of boiling water, leaving him scarred permanently. On another occasion, his mammy was giving him a row, and she said to him, "God is watching you." And his response was to go and hide under the bench and ask her if God could see him under there. Being the youngest of 6 boys, he was assigned to help Mammy at home. She taught him to sew and to weave and to cook and to clean. He was very proud to be chief cook and bottle washer at the Peats, along with being the chief cow walker. Another job he was assigned to, under his father's instruction, was to eliminate the sheep's difficulty when she was giving birth by inserting his hand, which fitted perfectly. I've never heard of that before. Another job for the young boys was at potato planting time. The adults would go along and dig a furrow to plant the potatoes. So the boys had to go behind the adults and place a potato exactly 9 inches apart with the eyes facing the sun along the furrow and cover them with manure. The best job the boys had fun with was jumping on the haystacks so that the haystacks would achieve their oblong shape. Their free time was happy and carefree. He said he would run around the crofts and the shore with the other boys. There were no fences in those days, he said, to hinder expeditions. He would chase rabbits, play shinty with homemade sticks and small stones or peat cuttings for balls. He would make wooden boats with paper sails to send across the village loch. The children were welcome in every house in the village, and every adult in the village was viewed as an extra parent, as wounds were tended and food and reprimands were freely given as required. At the age of 5, he started school and walked barefooted the 2 miles to Marvik in the summer. If the herring fishing earnings were good that year, all the children got tackety boots for the winter. These boots had to last a whole year and went under many repairs. He said by the age of 11 he could repair his own boots. Now it was when he was in school he got the nickname Ease, which was apparently derived from the Gaelic of Angus, which is Inish. Dad told us this story of an incident that occurred when he was about 6 years old. His recollection went as follows. My grandparents' thatched house was close to our house, and there was, as usual, a small window at the top of the wall in the thatch in the byre end of the house, consisting of a single pane of glass about 1 foot square. Probably it was a removable window for the purpose of letting the hens in and out of the byre. Boys will be boys, and idle hands are mischievous hands. Seemingly, I felt challenged to aim a stone at the window. It took me quite a while and a lot of stones before I eventually scored a direct hit and crashed a stone through the glass. It was then that I realised my guilt and folly of my action, and I ran to hide under the nearby rock, much like the story of Adam and Eve. After a suitable while, I innocently popped my head up to see if all was clear. And lo and behold, there was my grandfather, a tall, quiet, dignified man, reputed to be an unusually strong person. There was nothing for it but to face the consequences. To my surprise, he did not scold me as expected, but said quietly, "Angus, you should not have broken the window." Then we both walked away silently. That was my first and abiding practical moral lesson in right and wrong. Most adults walked to church at Graver on Sundays when he was little, which meant they were away for hours on a Sunday. But only the children with good clothes were allowed to go. So when the folks had gone out of sight, or as Dad put it, safely incarcerated in church, he said that, not me, he and his pals would get up what he called mild mischief. For example, releasing rams from the byre and allowing them to head fight for supremacy. This was known as Bloxike. He was 7 or 8 years old before the first road reached Calbust village. He was 10 or 11 years old before the road between Calbust and Stornoway was completed. Telephone messages were transmitted across the Minch for the first time on the cable that was laid in 1872. That cable remained in service until 1933. There were only 20 telephone subscribers in Stornoway in 1929, and no phones were available outside Stornoway except in the post offices. Radios became available in the 1920s. His formal education ended when he left school aged 14 in 1930, and he took some jobs on local fishing boats. He recollected that this was not easy for a young boy. He found the work hard, he suffered from seasickness, and only came home with £8.50 for a whole summer season. His father was a fisherman and weaver as well as a crofter. His mother had learned to weave as a girl, so he was used to the loom since the day he was born and maintained an interest in weaving for the rest of his life. At the age of 18, he joined the Royal Naval Reserve and travelled to Portsmouth for training sessions. When he was 20, he stepped off a train in London following a training session in the hope of securing a berth as a naval seaman. To his surprise, he got a berth on a banana boat heading to Jamaica, and he went off the next day, and he was on that boat for about 2 years. But like so many others in 1938, he was ordered home to prepare for call-up to the Second World War. While waiting on call-up, he took seriously ill with tuberculosis and was actually one of the first people to survive this terrible scourge after having part of his right lung removed. He had a huge scar down his back. When he returned to Calbust in 1941, very much an invalid, out of the 150 or so residents in Calbust, 54 were on duties serving in the war. Da was still recovering and only had £26 savings in his pocket. His father had died suddenly in 1940 while working on the croft, and his mother, already unwell when he reached home, died in 1942. 2 of his brothers were already in America, one of them sending back a little money to help. A third had died in 1937, and another was ill in Stornoway, yet one more victim of TB. The fifth brother, Murdo, obtained compassionate leave from the Navy and came home to look after everything. Da used his £26 savings to buy wool and took it to the communal boiler at the loch, where he washed and dyed it with the green crottle he had scraped off the rocks. He sent the wool to Stornoway to have it spun into a tweed and then moved to lodgings in Stornoway. He built his house in Marybank along with a large building the length of the Few to accommodate a garage for a car. Next was an area for a loom and yarn spinning. Next was an area for measuring tweeds and warping, and then there were offices at the end. Another smaller building had 2 storerooms for the tweeds. He soon acquired a loom and tools to produce warp and weft yarn and became a buying agent for a London Harris Tweed firm. He would buy Harris Tweed from the crofted weavers and sell it to London. Stornoway mills were not happy with the small producers, but he felt that the market was large enough to accommodate both the mills and the producers. He and Annie McInnes from Graver got married in 1946 at the Free Church Seminary, Stornoway, by a Reverend Macleod Graver. The reception was at Ma's family home, 8 Graver, followed by a dance in the Graver schoolhouse. Ma had come home the year before after working at an Alloa shipyard as part of her war duty. Their daughter Ishbel was born in 1947. Along with the house he built, he also opened a grocery store and small cafe 2 doors along in Marybank. He did tell me one story that, if you know the chemist Kenny John MacDonald, originally the owner Ishbel Froggan, came out to him at the shop one day and said to him, "Angus, I hope you're not going to take any of my business away from me." And he promised her he wouldn't. Now, he admitted there was one thing he sold in the shop that she sold, but she wasn't selling it to the customers that were coming to him. His customers for the jars of sweeties, the big jars, where the college boys, they used to come up from the castle through the grounds to the shop. It only took them 7-10 minutes to walk up through the grounds. So they were his sweetie customers. So Ishbel let him off with that. He closed the grocery store in 1965 as the Harris Tweed business he had set up on the same site as the house was successful for him. He did write about the Harris Tweed. Wartime meant a seller's market for all Harris Tweed producers. By 1949, peace had opened worldwide competition, and the crofters could not withstand this change. So from that year on, manufacture was largely in the hands of 4 Stornoway mill spinners and about a dozen of the larger small producers, of whom I was one. Thereafter, production of the tweed increased, reaching its peak in 1966. From then on, the production of Harris Tweed dropped, largely because of unreasonable competition among the manufacturers of the cloth. It was Da himself that wrote that summary. He became seriously ill again with pancreatic failure in 1969 and had to withdraw from Harris Tweed production. When he recovered, he had to find some other way of earning a living. He and Ma started a tourist business. 3 caravans, 1 in Calbust and 2 on Stornoway, were let out, and a house also in Calbust were let out to the tourists. In their Marybank home, they offered bed and breakfast from about 1973. Da would help with the dishes and enjoyed entertaining the guests in the evening. During this time, he also built a small house on the side of a rocky hill at 8 Calbust to let out to tourists. The foundation had to be over 7 foot high to allow the top house to be level. But he decided to make the foundation into living quarters for us. So there was like a bed, 2 beds, there was a shower, there was a toilet, there was a kitchen, and there was a table. But there was a cupboard at the end of the bed,
but you couldn't put anything in the cupboard because when you opened the doors, all you could see was a rock face. But we spent many a time over there. The tourist enterprise was successful, and he kept that going till 1982 when he retired. In retirement, there was more time for voluntary work. I think his experiences and sense of social responsibility dictated what he would get involved in. He gave a great deal of his time to several organisations even before he retired, often as a founder member. Among them was the Western Isles Tourist Organisation, the Lewis Council of Social Services, which later became Voluntary Action Lewis. This, he said, was set up to help people in the community in need. It was before Cornhill and Shear came into existence, and there was no social work department here under the Ross and Cromarty Authority. He was also active in the Lewis Crofters Limited, or Lewis and Harris Crofters Union. Later, he became involved with Comunyathri na Pathg and the Pathg Association. He did pursue his wish to see a united, well-organised Crofters Union, able to deal with government and with all other relevant authorities. His first step was to try and revive the old Federation of Crofters Union as an interim stage towards founding the single Crofters Union of his dreams. Receiving support from the Highlands and Islands Development Board and working ceaselessly to achieve his goal, he saw the establishment of the Scottish Crofters Union in 1986. He declined the office of the union's first chairman, but agreed to become honorary president. In November 1986, he received a letter which completely stunned him from the Prime Minister, asking his permission for his name to be recommended to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II at New Year 1987 to become a member of the British Empire. He accepted the nomination, and he and Ma travelled to Buckingham Palace, where he received his medal from Her Majesty for services to the crofting community. I do remember phoning him on the New Year's Day at 8 o'clock in the morning to congratulate him. He was delighted and phoned me every day for 2 or 3 weeks after, stunned at the cards and all the congratulatory messages and phone calls he was getting. On the trip to London, he and Ma went to visit Madame Tussauds, and the only waxworks he wanted to see. Another project he pursued with passion was his museum collection. To quote himself again, "It occurred to me that seeing I now had a suitable place, my father's house, to accommodate objects relating to the history of the people, I should make a start by going to Harris to see if I could recover my father's wooden loom, which was in place in the kitchen when I was growing up, but subsequently had been sold in Harris. After searching throughout a good part of Harris, I failed to locate it, but I did come across someone who was willing to sell a similar wooden loom to me. As I had a large trailer at the back of my car, I bought that loom, and that was the first artefact in the Calbus collection. That was in 1965, and thereafter I applied myself to collecting many things that people were throwing out, particularly if they were moving house. I was able to gather a good collection of many hundreds of artefacts. We as a family eventually donated to the Stornoway Museum for display of the artefacts. Benches, chairs, dresser, crockery, ornaments, box bed, kitchen vessels, utensils, tools, spinning wheel, implements, all were assembled, and to nearly every item he attached a story. Visitors did come to Calbust and to see the collection, and he did enjoy telling them where they came from and what they were used for. He was quite, how can I say, passionate about this. I remember going over to the west side, Barvis, with him one day, and he stopped the car and he said, "There's something on the side of the road. It might do for the collection. Go and see what it is." I went, "We're in the middle of the Barvis Muirda." Go and see what it is. I went and got it. It was an empty baked beans can. But that's how keen he was on the whole venture. But the trust, there's now a family trust that own the collection, and it is managed by Museum Danielen. His interest in local history extended even further than collecting artefacts. He would visit people and record conversations with them, which he transcribed later. The Angus Macleod archive contains files full of genealogies, research on crofting, fishing, and all aspects of the history and geography of Park. There are thousands of handwritten and typed documents in the archive. When Donny, the chairman of the Common Yachtry, had the idea of setting up the archive in Dad's names, I was a bit dubious myself about the idea, but grants enabled the archive to be set up at Ravenspoint in 2003, with the Islands Book Trust sourcing the money for it. News of this archive did spread worldwide, and the knowledge and meticulous research is still widely used. Another way of remembering the past and physically preserving history was when he turned his attention to memorials, not specifically of Calbust, and not more generally of war losses, but of stages in history of a different kind. Reflecting on the story of ordinary Lewis people, and particularly those in South Lochs, he knew from tradition and from printed records that over the later years of the 19th century and into the early 20s, even with his own lifetime, the struggle for securing a firm foothold on the land had been a leading preoccupation of the crofters. Out along the coast and among the hills of Path were signs of those former inhabitants, the ruined, roofless, crumbling houses, shillings of pre-clearance life. Even after the Crofters Act of 1886, giving security of tenure to crofters, many families desperately needed more land, and their grievances led to the land raids of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when some crofters attempted to seize land against the wishes of the landowners. To quote him again, he said, "We set up a committee representative as far as possible of the whole island, and we were not sure what form or design the memorials should take. We debated the issue thoroughly, and we agreed that our organisation be called Cainochan na Gaisceach, Memorials for the Heroes. Then we realised we had the benefit of 2 trained artists as members of our committee. They both advocated strongly that we should commission a suitable artist with a thorough knowledge of the history of the Highlands. But Dan never lost that mischievous streak with which he was born. One time he and my brother were going over to Calbust, and he got Ian to wear a woman's wig on the way over just to see how long before the report came back to his ears that he had a strange woman with him. As expected, when he went over the following week, he was asked politely if he had visitors at home on holiday. Another example of his mischief streak, he grew a beard in the 70s just to see the reaction by the locals. Beards were not in fashion then, especially for a man going to church. As if that wasn't enough, he took to wearing a bow tie. The responses, along with folk avoiding him on the street, amused him greatly. For Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's Silver Jubilee in 1977, he didn't mind that he was probably the only man on the island who put up a lot of flags round his house in Marybank. This is the main road between Lewis and Harris. Some of these flags he made himself, he could still sew, and some he made out of plastic and things. And he was quite happy to show off that he loved Her Majesty the Queen. Although he lived in Stornoway, he would go over to Calbust every chance he got to fish and look after the croft. One time he and his brother Murdo went out fishing in the rowing boat. A heavy fog descended quickly, and it was the sound of the sheep bleating that enabled them to find land. On these fishing trips, he had to endure, his words, one habit of his brother that he did not enjoy. Murdo would boil eggs in a pan. When once he took the eggs out, he would add the tea leaves to the water the eggs had been in and made the tea. And Dad had to drink it. He did hate idleness, and when he was not working or at his desk, he would think of projects to occupy his mind. He built little wooden hotels for the birds, and he put them up on the walls around the house. He also designed and made 2 large cement Bibles to place on the gateposts of Calbust Mission House, which are still there. One time, when he was visiting me on the mainland, I left him in the house just for a short while I went shopping. On my return, he made toys out of bits and pieces for the kitten. And I said, "The cat's got toys already." And he said, "The cat's bored." So he thought the cat would be much more entertained with his homemade toys. One time, when I was home on holiday, he took me downtown, and someone had parked in his usual space. That's where the model of the herring girl is now with the barrels at the corner there. He always parked there. He was mad. Somebody had parked there. And he did go mad. And I said, "Dad, your name isn't written on the space." And he said, "Doesn't need to be written on the space. Everybody knows." He did not watch a lot of television, but he loved sitcoms like Only Fools and Horses. Another one called A Step to One's Son, which was like an antique dealer comedy, and Panahandy, which was on a fishing boat. The only sport he watched on telly was boxing and wrestling, darts and snooker. I remember he did buy us boxing gloves and put a dartboard up in the garage for us. His favourite newsreader was Sir Trevor MacDonald. As my sons grew up, they would often receive handwritten letters from Pap. Here is one of his last. "Dear Robert, Callum and Lewis, thank you very much for remembering me on Father's Day. It was very kind of you, and your card was lovely. It is very nice that young boys are thinking of me, and I am looking forward to you coming up to see me. The school holidays will be on soon, and you will enjoy being free and be able to help Mammy around the house. I'm sending you some pictures which Mammy will explain. You see, I am still learning because I left school too early, and I soon found out that I did not have enough education to enable me to get a good, well-paid job. Young boys nowadays are lucky. They can stay at school and go to college or university and be well informed. I strongly recommend that you boys do your best to learn your lessons while you are young, because that will help you when you get older to get good work. Enclosed are a few pounds spending money. Sincerely, Pap." Don't know how many of you are grandparents, but I don't know if anyone writes letters to their grandchildren like that anymore. But it was quite funny when the boys would come in and see that they had got a letter from Pap. It was quite funny because they would say, "Be 2 things in it. Do well at school and there'll be money." So my mother passed away suddenly in 1997. After that, Dad's health deteriorated steadily. The evening before he passed away in 2002, he was feeling very sick and very frightened. The doctor came to see him and gave him some medication. He went to bed. I used to lie on a camp bed mattress on the floor beside him if he needed anything through the night. But this night he asked me to lie on the bed beside him, which I did. So we chatted away. And he thanked me for coming home to look after him. He passed away just shortly after that. He was very thankful to have been brought up here, and I have to say, so am I, very thankful to have been brought here. As Donnie said, this is the 21st in this series, and there's been quite a few very interesting, well-learned people. So I thought I would recount these previous lectures for you. The first one in 2004 was given by the late Reverend Professor Donald Macleod, entitled Passion and Paradox. He gave an account of Dad's life and passions. Second lecture was by Professor James Hunter. He spoke about a moorland without crofters. Professor Hunter worked with Da establishing the Crofters Union, and I think it was him that nominated Da for the MBE. Bill Lawson was number 3, and he spoke on the clearances in Lewis. And Mr. Lawson and Da did quite a lot of work together on genealogies. Number 4 was Brian Wilson, speaking on the case for crofting tenure. Number 5 was Christine Kennedy. She a personal perspective from the village of Oronsay. Christine also recorded a lament that was written for their daughter Ishbel, which the BBC, you hear it sometimes getting played on the Gaelic radio. Number 6 was Charles Kennedy, the late Charles Kennedy MP. He spoke on crofting and a European future. Number 7 was Agnes Rennie on land reform. Number 8 was Professor Boyd Robertson, the principal of Solmo Rostaig. He spoke on language, culture and community. Number 9 was Emeritus Professor Donald Meek, with an alternative view to crofting. Number 10 was Kenny McCaskill, MP, Opportunities of Independence for Islands. Number 11 was Maggie Cunningham, and she spoke on Gaelic broadcasting in the 21st century. Number 12 was John Norgrove, and he spoke on Afghanistan and how it changed our family. John Norgrove was quite instrumental when it came to the memorial cairns, because he was able to direct them and help them with how to apply for money and grants to build the cairns with his technical and engineering expertise. Number 13 was John Swinney, who was MSP then. He was Deputy Scottish Minister. The Place of Gaelic in a Modern Scotland was his title. Number 14 was Donalda McKinnon, the role of the BBC in an ever-changing global communications industry. Number 15 was Dr. Angus Macmillan on the war hero of Boonsey. Number 16 was Kenny Matheson, the broadcaster, on the Leverhulme Initiative. Number 17 was Joni Buchanan. That was the COVID lecture in 2020. And she spoke on Hebridean women, and she's since published a book on the same subject. Number 18 was Alistair McIntosh on land, community and climate change. Number 19 was Dolina McLennan and the power of poetry. Number 20 last year was Professor Will McLean, and he was a designer of the Lewisland monuments, and he gave a presentation on that. And I'm number 21. So thank you all.
So, does anyone have any questions for Elizabeth before she runs away? Anybody have any questions? Oh, stunned into silence, eh? Very good. All right. Well, thank you. So, John, where is John? You're on next. Vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, Donny. Right, it's my great pleasure to propose a vote of thanks. It's in several parts. I suppose first and foremost to Angus Macleod, and this is the memorial lecture, the last one in the series in his honour, and Angus was a fantastic man, as you all know and as you've heard tonight. But I also want to propose a vote of thanks to Elizabeth, because the Angus Macleod archive obviously wouldn't have been there had it not been for Angus, but I can tell you it would also not have been there if it wasn't for Elizabeth. Elizabeth was still is, the driving force behind the development of the Angus Macleod archive. I was involved, as was Donny and many other people, right from the start, 21 years ago. And it was Elizabeth and her brother, but mainly Elizabeth, who drove us on to make sure that that archive that her father had developed over the years was preserved now in Ravenspoint for posterity. When I first saw the archive, it was in a series of shoeboxes under the stairs, I think, in Elizabeth's house. She did the first cataloguing of it, but she soon got the rest of us to catalogue it in a more permanent form, as you'll see at Ravenspoint, in those red folders. She also drove us on to digitise the archive so that we have a website. We had a couple of funded projects to do that. So that archive is a permanent memorial to Angus Macleod and also, I think, to Elizabeth. I look at the archive from the outside, of course, but it seems to me to cover so many subjects, from land reform to agriculture, crofting, fishing, transport, education, the church, you name it. It's all there in the archive. And it's the most wonderful description of life. Not everything, I think, in the archive historians would necessarily agree with. I think there are some facts in there that people might challenge. But what it does give, and this is its real value, is it's the view of the world as seen from South Locks. The attitudes and the views of the community, not just Angus, but the community as a whole, on things like land reform, for example, and any subject you like. That's extremely valuable, and he was doing that at a time when local history was not particularly fashionable. It has become much more fashionable now. Got commentary all over the place, but back in the 1960s, 70s, he was very much on his own, and I think Elizabeth has seen the value of that, and it's a tribute to her as well as to her father that the archive is where it is today. And the website, of course, has a lot of the archive in digital form. So I'll ask you in a minute to put your hands together for both Angus and for Elizabeth. But before I do that, I've got quite a long list of people who have made this evening a success. I think we have heard a really memorable lecture, very moving lecture from Elizabeth. And in fact, she is the only person who could have given some of the things that she spoke about this evening. Before the lecture, she was telling me that, I've got nothing new to say, and people won't, what's the point of me giving it? Well, there were unique things that she did have to say, and she did it in a very personal and moving way. And I think we're very, very grateful to her for that. Also grateful, of course, to the school for the use of the school here, the collier, the head teacher, Louise and the other members of staff, Ian Nicholson for help with bringing all the chairs in here from Oronsay Hall, and also driving the bus. Grateful to Locks Motors as well for use of that bus. And Park Free Church for the car parking, use of their car park. Catering to Christina and all her helpers. We're about to enjoy the fruits of that catering in a minute. Jack Wolfe and his colleague Callum for recording the lecture and live streaming it. I think we've got quite a lot of people online that listening in. Tremendously useful to have that permanent record. Ben, who was on traffic control, some of you will have met him, I think, in the dark. Used to be Elizabeth that did the traffic father produced, and really that archive is a tribute to her as well as to Angus Macleod. So would you join with me the vote of thanks?
I think you're on next. Yes.
That's a tune. Martyrdom, that's a tune. Is Psalm 16.
Sam, put the doe on him.
Tall for me.
Too tall. Ik kan het jou maar.
Cael ma chwyd bys mair o'r dias, dwi hesus mwy. Cael Molly.
Thank you. So, before we close, there's one more person to thank. And indeed, these lectures wouldn't have happened without the huge amount of work John has put in over these 21 years. Believe me, it is a lot of work behind the scenes, and John has done most of the organising of the speakers over that time. We couldn't have done it without him. Thank you, John. So put your hands together for John. There's no free lunches, so my final word then is that this year we have been unable to raise all the funds to support the costs. So it's really a plea for donations this year. These would be greatly appreciated. There's a donations box over there. Park Trust funded 50% of our costs this year, and we thank them for their support. So I now just call on Torkel to say a few words before we have some refreshments. And of course you can buy the book as well, that supports our cause. Thank you.
Thanks, Donny. Before we give thanks, I would just like to put a sort of personal small stone on a very well-rounded cairn of remembrance. And it was alluded to tonight when Elizabeth was talking about her father's ventures and the shop he had, the grocery store he had. Well, me as a young kid used to visit that store quite often. I would be with my aunt in Benidrove, and she'd be sending me most mornings for fresh bread. And on collecting the bread, there I learnt the art of, from the shop to the house, how you could bore a hole through a loaf, bit by bit, tasting the bread. The other thing I would like to say is, I think it was 1972. It was the first year we came home from Glasgow, and the communions were on in Gravert. And the church had a vacancy. And there were so many people visiting that weekend in Gravert that there was no place for people to stay overnight in most of the houses. The houses were full. And Ease came over from Stornoway, and he opened his house, and 22 of us slept that night in Ease's house. Such was their hospitality and kindness. Let's give thanks. We thank you, Lord, for memories. We thank you for the path in which you have taken us all. We can surely say, on looking back, that goodness and mercy has indeed followed us all the days of our life. And we have been so privileged as a people to live where we do live, in the beauty and in the peace of these rugged islands, in a world which is changing so much and so sad. We give thanks today for your mercy and your grace. We give thanks that you are protecting and guiding, that you are leading, but give us hearts to realize and to see it. Bless the food prepared for us and those who so graciously made the provision, and pardon our sins for Jesus' sake. Amen.
So while these ladies get the water boiling and get the coffees and teas going, feel free to chat among yourselves.